Well, it's delightful to be with you today. We are very excited about that. We've got a stand outside, so we've got more information if you want to come and talk to us afterwards. And I gather that Elaine Storkey has been doing a bit of a warm-up. I don't ever feel she's the warm-up act for me. She's one of my big heroines, really, but she's been talking all morning. So I think we've got a lot in common, and we're both passionate about this issue. She helped us speak at General Synod when we were doing an FGM side event, and she's also helped, we've contributed to her book as well, so we've both got a lot in common there, really. So I titled this talk, A Rallying Cry to End FGM, Top Tips to End the Most Extreme Form of Violence in Our Generation. Some of you may be working here with other extreme forms of violence, but I have to say, I've been working with this issue since about 2005, and I honestly do think this is one of the worst atrocities of our time. Who am I? Well, I had a background in human resources and corporate worlds. I worked as a psychologist, and then I worked with MEDAIR. Some of you might have heard of them, a Christian NGO that works in war zones and places of natural disaster. And I found myself working in West Darfur, as you do, met a little girl who'd had FGM, female genital mutilation, at 5 years old, and had been raped at 10 years old, and all her village were killed and left for dead. But she was left alive, but for dead. And she actually survived when her family and the whole of her village was left. And instead of going home at the end of my mission trip, I found myself coming back home, saying to my church, I found what I want to do. I'm going to help end FGM, this practice that's only been going on for 2,000 years and not terribly difficult to challenge, really. There was no place for it in the church at that point. There was no sending agency that had a presence with FGM. My church said, oh, I don't think so. And I thought, oh, I think so. So 7 years later, after putting me on a very long apprenticeship, I won, and they are blessed with having me as one of their missionaries, I think, and the Church Mission Society too. So there we are, one for us. So I use all the skills I've got from that sort of different area. I think one of the things is that God never wastes anything that happens in life. I've had all sorts of checkered life, very colourful experiences, I think I call it, really, and nothing is wasted. It's all helped me to get through the things I'm doing today. But this is one of those bits of the Bible I really take solace out of, from Jeremiah 1. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. And I have had the great privilege of talking to first ladies in different African countries, to presidents and ministers, and helping end FGM in some of these countries. Our charity is called 28 Too Many. Some of you wonder why it's called a name like that. It's the 28 countries in Africa that practice FGM. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen elsewhere, but that's the root of where it is. If it was eradicated in Africa, about 70% of all FGM in the world would be got rid of in one go. So it seemed a logical place to start. And also it's where FGM came from. The Sudanese blame it on the Egyptians and the Egyptians on the Sudanese, and it's probably one of the two. It's a slavery, black-on-black slave practice, actually, historically, we believe. But I think that was my piece of one of the Bible verses I hold on to. And I think if you're going to do something tough in this world, you need to make sure you really are called, and make sure that when the going gets tough, you've got some things to hold on to, because I guarantee there will be tough things happen to you, even if it's like mind games or spiritual attack or physical attack, emotional issues, and you need to know that God is with you throughout all of this, because actually it's all done in his name, not our name. So it doesn't really matter what happens to us, and he always comes out on top, literally. And I just think when it gets that tough, it's like, you know what, God, you've just got to get me out of this scrape, and he does. So I think that's okay. I don't have to worry about these things. So we are a research charity. You can look us up on the net sometime later if you want, or come and look at our literature on the stands. But we are a research charity that empowers countries to change their laws or put in laws in practice. At the moment, we're looking at the law. We've just done some law reports, and we've just come back from the States. We were in New York, actually, till about 6 o'clock this morning, really. And we should have been here about 9 o'clock, but things happened, and we weren't quite there. So our plane went into an alternative cycling routine, a bit like the M25 in the sky this morning, so we missed our plane. And then we got on a train and somebody decided to tragically jump off a bridge. They didn't, thank goodness. We prayed a lot about that. But it meant we couldn't quite get up the track. So it's like, okay. But we got here on time. God is good. So what we do is we help governments enforce policy, make laws if they haven't got it, have schools pack, have things that are like training packs that you can do in a rural setting or a Western setting. And we just were launching our law report, which is, apart from the 29 country reports, one in each of the countries, the 28 countries, we also now have law reports on each of the 29 countries as well. So it's like model law, and actually that's quite exciting because it means you can then actually put the law in place if you haven't got it already, and then you can uphold the law, and then that will make a difference. FGM isn't stopped just by the law, but it's a jolly good piece to have in place as well. And of course it also helps at policy level in churches as well, safeguarding policies and training pastors and everyone associated with these types of things. Yesterday we were teaching and training the border controls in the US, as you do, FBI and all of that. So they are a little bit behind us in terms of FGM awareness, so we're trying to help set them up so that all across their country, which is a lot of states, so there's state law and federal law, that they're getting their stuff together and learning from what we've already done before. So it's quite exciting because it's actually moving things forward as we've previously done for Australia. So our research is, we've set our heart on these 28 countries. There is FGM in other countries, a little bit of Indonesia, and some of the Arab Emirates, some of the parts like Colombia in South America, and a little bit in Asia like India, the Bora people, India-Pakistan border, but principally it's in Africa. So we're just halfway. We're halfway at about year 6 of this charity, 14 reports done and 14 to go. And we've also done these thematic reports. So one is on medicalisation, because medicalisation is a big new trend, that FGM is the same, but in a sanitised way. Of course, that makes it good because girls aren't dying of sepsis or tetanus issues, but it's actually just as traumatic to have FGM in any context. The ruin of sexual pleasure, consummation of marriage, the ruin of childbirthing and reproductive health, marital relations generally, loss of children, pre-birth is all just the same, and psychological trauma, all just the same whether you have it in a doctor's surgery with anaesthetic or not. The law report we've just talked to you about. We're also doing something on anthropology, like where did FGM come from and how's it actually moved across the country. It's heavily influenced and adopted by Islamic countries, Muslim majority countries, but that's not the only requirement. It's actually in countries that are Christian as well, so it's actually practiced more by the Christians in Tanzania than the Muslims, interestingly enough. So we're looking at the anthropological roots as well, and we're also doing one on religion and FGM as well. So what is the actual Bible and the Quran say? Both of them say it's not needed, but faith can be misused, and we don't want to allow that to happen as well. So one of the other things that I felt was helping me, I've called it a rallying cry, was how Esther responded. Esther was really a girl who was trafficked to a large extent. She was in a sort of beauty parade. And I think one of the things that appealed to me was that it says perhaps that there is a reason for you to have been chosen and created for such a time as this. And I think that's really important. And I feel the same for me. I would have liked other things to happen to me perhaps in my life. I would perhaps like to have had children. I would perhaps like to have stayed in a career and done things differently and lived in one place rather than being a bit nomadic. But I feel I was chosen for such a time as this. I met that little girl, felt like a little shard of glass went into my heart and has stayed lodged in my heart, and it felt God saying, this is what you're meant to do. And it feels I'm the only person who's meant to do that. And I feel shivers go down my spine when I say that, because I genuinely think that's come from God. I literally heard an audible cry. When I said, who's going to look after girls like this? This girl was going to make a very bad, probably 4th marriage as a spoilt girl at 12 years old with a child already. I said, who's going to look after her? And I said, who are you going to get to sort this out, God? And he said, you will. And it's like, no, surely not me. I'm white. I don't speak the language. I burn in the sun. I'm supposed to be going home to a day job. But if you hear God call, I think it's sensible to obey, really, and I think I did, and so I have. I think as well Isaiah also speaks to me a lot for binding up the brokenhearted, proclaiming freedom for the people who are broken, and setting the prisoners free. And I think that's also something that's really important. So I think that book of the Bible also speaks closely to my heart. And then I think, again, as you think about, well, what is perhaps God talking to you through coming to hear me talk? Because this isn't just about me. I don't want you to go home thinking, well, wow, she was pretty amazing, or she was completely bats, or she's really eccentric, or I'm glad I'm not like her. I would like God to talk to you and see what you can do differently, or be encouraged that you're on the right track and you're amongst other people who are pioneering and people who are on the edges of the church, who are a bit like us, a bit maverick. We're not going to fit in mainstream society. I've got used to that now. Have you got used to that now? I think it's quite nice not fitting in. I like being eccentric. I just think that's okay. I'm around other eccentric people in places like this. But back in my normal church, which is quite normal, I don't really fit in, if I'm really honest. I think they think, what do we do with a problem like Anne-Marie? And you can insert your own name probably, and maybe your church thinks the same thing. But we are meant to be doing things like this. My view is if Jesus was here, he'd be eating with women who'd had FGM. He would have been advocating for the rights of these women. Maybe even the woman that bled had FGM at some stage. Who knows? Maybe she'd had that early on and that's why she was always bleeding. But we need to also think how we respond to God as well. I always think that Jonah was very brave. He ran away from his call. I'm not as brave as Jonah, so I just thought, all right, God, I hear you, I'll go. Because I think actually he'd come back and unceremoniously hoik me back, and I think that's far more undignified than just getting on with it anyway. So I think that's just about knowing when to respond. But I think the other thing is I'm a bit of a planner. Who have we got in here that's planners? Yeah, I got the planners. I like plans. So I like to plan because if I have plans, I don't get stressed. So I like to have loose plans that can move, but I definitely don't like not to have a plan. And I think Nehemiah is a really good person there for us to model upon because he starts by prayerfully responding as well. All the rest follows, but he goes to the king, he's brave, and he prays, and then he delivers, and it's all very lined up. So if you're not so sure, read the book of Nehemiah and see what that might be talking to you as well. Okay, well, we've talked a little bit about responding to this rallying call, which is really what I wanted to talk to you about this. Let's talk a little bit about FGM. And you may be quite shocked by some of these statistics. And if you find some of this work difficult, or it hits on things that have happened to you, we're going to be around for the rest of the day. Andrea, my colleague, and I will be around. We're both trained as psychological supporters, so we can sit with you and pray with you or talk things through as well. So please feel free, if you need to go out the room and take a bit of space, that's okay. But it's a safe space for you to work through your feelings as well, and we can pray through things with you as well. But in terms of FGM, globally, over 125 million girls and women live with the effects of FGM. 125 million, that's twice the population of the UK has had FGM. Now that's such a big statistic, it's hard to actually get that into your head if you're anyone like me. But in the UK, bringing it a little bit closer to home, more than 137,000 girls in the UK are at risk of FGM every year. That's here, that's in the UK. And in our law report, when we were talking to the FBI yesterday, we were telling them about the position in Manchester itself. This is one of the three big metropolises in the UK, Birmingham and Manchester, big strongholds of FGM. So we can tell you about that later if you want, but which migrant populations come here and are likely to carry on practicing FGM illegally, underground, informally, despite either because they don't know the law or they do know the law and they ignore it. So what does that really mean? It really means that every 10 seconds a girl is cut somewhere in the planet. Every 10 seconds someone is cut. I mean, I think that's just shocking, really. That means 6 girls every hour. If I was speaking for half an hour, that's 3 more girls are cut somewhere. And I think that's just something we have to stop. We've just been doing this report on the impact of the law. And what we've worked out, this is brand new information just out this week from us, is that there's 55 million African girls under the age of 15 have had or will have FGM. 55 million, that's about the UK population as well. And 50% of these in Egypt, Ethiopia and Nigeria. That means if you took out those three countries, that 55 would go down to like 27 million. Do you see? So you just need to interfere and sort out the prime ministers, the presidents of those countries, get the laws passed, get the laws adhered to, and you've sorted out the lives of 27 million girls. Don't you think that's amazing? Wouldn't you like to help with that? That's what excites me. That's what I go to bed thinking about rather than counting sheep. Another 30% are from Chad, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Somalia and Sudan. So between those two, there's 80% of those groups from those 9 countries, which are actually then you can target. And this is where we need to target our governments. We'll be out again in New York next March at the Commission on the Status of Women at the UN, lobbying those countries to change their laws, to adhere to their laws, to change their judging system, their judicial system, to train their police people, to train their health people. We were talking to the Americans yesterday, and they don't have mandatory reporting like we do in the UK. They're still a little bit like we were 5 or 10 years ago, where it's like, oh, we don't really like to ask somebody if they've had FGM. Or they'll ask, did you go back home this summer? Did you have a party when you were back home? It's like, people are just going to say no. They know the questions to not say. We've got a plane to catch, mate. We don't understand what you're talking about. But they do. They were talking to us yesterday, whether I should say this or not, about a plane to Ethiopia. And 30 out of 30 people said, no, we don't do that. We come to America because we don't believe in FGM. We don't do it anymore. But statistically, that doesn't make sense. You wouldn't get 30 people not doing it. You'd probably get maybe 10 to 15 people doing it. So we've got to change how that's identified. So 6 have no laws in these countries I've just mentioned, which means FGM is legal. How can you abuse women? How can you cut women's genitals for non-medical reasons? How can you be in a country where that's allowed to happen? 5 of these 6 have drafts and want to pass laws, but they haven't done it, sitting on someone's desk in a bureaucratic office. So these people need to be lobbied to change the law and get on with it and pass the law. So this is where we need to put pressure on our lawyers and our ministers, our diaspora communities, the people who come from somewhere else and live here, to push pressure on back home as well, or the all-parliamentary groups, and say, this is not acceptable, we want change. This is where change.org issues on social media need to happen to get this out. It's where we the church, need to say, we've had enough of this. We're not going to let this happen. And where we have diversity in our church, these will be practices that will have affected people, if not in the UK, in their home country. It probably takes 3 generations to make a change. A woman to not be cut as a child, to then not cut when she's an adult mother 12 years later, mother at 12, to then not cut when she's a grandmother at 24 as a circumciser. So within 25 years, you can have 3 generations. And it just starts with the generation that are children now. If children are safe and protected as children and can live whole, then all will be well. I thought I'd just set this a little bit in the scenes of interconnecting factors as well. So if you look at this picture, you can see that FGM sits in the middle here, but there's all sorts of different things around it. The role of the law, patriarchy and misogyny, of course, the root of all of these things, violence against women. The role of men and boys, it may be done by women, but it's because women don't have a voice, and they're under the thumb of a lot of men. So we need to change that as well. We need to encourage men and boys to want to marry girls that are uncut, not cut. We need to actually look at reproductive health, the rights of girls. We need to educate girls. We need to actually think about what's this last one here? The role of faith as well, both whether it's Islamic or Christian perspective. And we need to think about the economic drivers. Circumcisers get an income from cutting girls. A proportion of their income will go to the chiefs who get an income. We need to give alternative income to change practice. Okay, well, hopefully that set the context for you. What I just want to share with you briefly is some top tips for ending FGM. So I think it's about finding your inner roar. How many of you know how to roar? Do you reckon you can roar? Okay, it's after lunch. I knew most people don't go to sleep in my seminar anyway. I think that's why they gave me the graveyard. So if you want to stand up, I want you to give a rallying roar. Can you all do that? Right, let's hear it now. 1, 2, 3. Rah! Excellent. Should we do another one? Rah! And third for good measure. Rah! There we are. All right, sit down again now. So this is your inner roar. Remember this when the going gets tough. God will use everything and turn it for good. Know what your calling is and be as specific and focused as you can be. It isn't always forever. I think I'm on about my 4th or 5th so-called career, and I'm on my 2nd calling. FGM is one, but also working in hospices and chaplaincy with the sick and the dying, because they really need Jesus, frankly, as well. So I'm doing that as well as my sort of hobby on top of my day job. Building good foundations, you really need prayer and support. We're all broken and messed up, frankly, always. But God refines us, and he refines us through doing stuff as well. But I would really encourage you to make sure you've got prayer and support on the journey, because otherwise the enemy can get in little chinks and do you damage. I would also say set your goals high, but know your own limits. Remember, you're doing it yourself through God, not yourself. And then also just take one step at a time. You are building up this jigsaw or this like mosaic, really, and that actually one tiny step leads to world change. That's all it takes. We are not called to see where it'll end up. It's the next step. So whether you're a Nehemiah planner or not, it can be overwhelming. I was sitting talking to a guy on the train this morning. Bad luck, he got sitting next to me for 3 hours. He wasn't really expecting. But he was saying he'd always wanted to go to New York. And when I left the platform, he was kind enough to take my luggage off for me. And he'd said, I've always wanted to go to New York, but I've never got round to it. And I said, does your partner like travel? No, she doesn't really. And I said to him, look, if you're just going to do one thing, what stops you going to New York? Just go and do it. Don't put it off. Just go there. It's like a few £100 and just get on the plane. Because just do the things you can do, and that's just a silly example. But, don't put off really what you're meant to do. Just do small bits. Know the unique part you're called to do as well, and know what you're not called to do as well. Don't allow for what I call mission creep. Don't do other things other people are better at doing, but train other people to do things you can do as well. And share what you learn as well. We give all our work away for free. We're only supported by individuals supporting us. We don't get any government grants or any big funding or anything, but we do get enough. We need to get about 100,000 a year probably to do all our work, but we always have. 6 years on, we have done that. I did a sponsored event this summer, rocking around doing a marathon, as you do in a wheelchair. We got 20 grand for that. It's like, wow, that was good. 12 and a half hours sitting in a wheelchair with a bit of numb bum from the end of it. But, people were behind me. It was actually something people could do, they could engage, and that will have given us 20% of our funding for the year. Amazing, really. Remember that God is always able, and it's not our work, it's his. That stops ego and pride coming in. And know when to stop, pass on, or end. For me, as the founder of my charity, I always said when I founded it, I'm here for 10 years. We'll either mothball it, pass it on to somebody else, or we'll nest it under something into a different entity. But my part ends at year 10. So people have known that from day one. They might think I'm going to change my mind, but I absolutely am not. So it's like, that gives everyone a clear message, and it also allows for fresh blood to come in and people to get a chance to move up the hierarchy as well. So this next slide just shows you the sort of things you can do in responding to that matrix as well. Use our law report. You can share that with somebody who's in the law. You can use the youth voice in your churches to actually get men and boys interested in something like this. It isn't just girls' work, it's reproductive health. Men are just as involved. You can use teaching and biblical worldviews to address patriarchy and misogyny. We can use things like alternative occupations to teach people how to get an income instead of being cutters. We can use medicalisation and the report on that to address the reproductive health issues. We can make sure we've got a safeguarding policy in all our churches and posters on the back of our women's toilet doors so that people know where to go, emergency numbers to call. And schools packs, any of you involved in schools or PTAs or teachers, make sure that FGM is on the safeguarding part as well. So finally, just in terms of responding, I would really love you to respond to this rallying call. You know, I can't get round the 6 billion people on the planet, though I do pretty well. A weekend like this has I've done quite well, really. I've got around a few places, a few cities in one weekend. But there's only one of me, and I'm only meant to do one bit. I feel I'm the person meant to stir up that rallying cry. You're the ones that respond to the rallying cry in this context. Other times I'm in the same position as you. But I would just love you all to just commit to doing one thing from today, whether it's following us on social media or sharing a report or taking a schools pack, come and sign up to our newsletter. Doesn't matter what it is, but just say you've given up these 20 minutes to hear me talk and think I will do one thing differently. And that's all I ask of you. So thank you for your time. If you have any questions, I think we'll leave back to our compere to see if we're allowed questions. Otherwise, come and find me at the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.